What is the role of revelation? Is it the purpose of revelation to tell us everything about everything that we could ever know, or to help us to make progress one step at a time, or perhaps something in between? I humbly submit that revelation is God's opportunity to help us learn more about Him and His plan, or to help us learn more a bit about ourselves and the truths that we can live that make us happy and to bring light and goodness to the world. If we actually pay attention to what happens in Abraham chapter 3, verse 1 through 11, in terms of revelatory experience, there's some really enlightening things that we can learn. For example, you might notice that we might read this and be a little bit confused about what we call cosmology. It's a fancy word to talk about how the heavens operate, meaning the stars, the sun, the planet, and so forth. And what I find interesting here in Abraham 3 is how God worked revelation with Abraham. Now, if we look at these verses, Abraham chapter 3, 1 through 11, we might say, this isn't quite how modern day astronomers would describe how the heavens operate, how the sun works and the moon and the stars and all the planets. And what's interesting here is that God did not simply tell Abraham everything that Abraham could know about the celestial sphere, but He did tell him enough in Abraham's perspective that helped Abraham to understand more about who God is and who Abraham is. And it's interesting, as Abraham is going into Egypt, a place that spent a lot of time in astronomy and thinking about the stars, that Abraham shows up and he knows quite a bit about astronomy, but can actually teach spiritual lessons. So what I'm trying to focus on here is that God did not take the time to correct Abraham's understanding of cosmology, or even the Egyptians' understanding of cosmology. But God could have explained, yeah, all those things that you see out there in the sky, they're burning objects of like fiery gas, and they're billions of miles away. God did not do that. And you might ask, well, why not? Because it wasn't really relevant to Abraham's spiritual life or what God wanted Abraham to teach the Egyptians. So if you look at actually how God lays out this revelation, He works within Abraham's cultural understanding of how cosmology worked. There was an understanding in the ancient world, in the time of Abraham, definitely among the Egyptians, that there was gradations among the heavenly spheres, and that the lower spheres were operated or dictated to by higher spheres. And you have something similar going on here. We might just kind of map this briefly, that the Earth is at the center, and then you have maybe the sphere of the moon, the sun, the stars, and Kolob, which is an interesting word. It actually means near or next to in Hebrew. And so the idea here is, that the Earth is at the center. Now we know today, from hundreds of years of scientific research, that the Earth is not at the center of really anything. But in Abraham's day, people did believe from their observational viewpoint that the sun, moon, and stars, everything revolved around them. God did not take the time to correct Abraham's understanding of the real true physics of how the solar system works, or even the universe, because it actually wasn't relevant to Abraham's understanding of God or himself at that time. But this is how the Egyptians understood it. So God taught these important principles that God is above all. And just as people in the time of Abraham and the time of the Egyptians believed that you had successive layers that had greater power and authority under what was below, right? So whatever's at the top has total power and ability to command whatever is in the lower spheres. That actually teaches a really powerful principle that God wanted Abraham to know, and He wanted the Egyptians to know. Why do we share all this? Because God will work with you wherever you're at in your life. He will give you inspiration that helps you take your next step. And it may be that He doesn't tell you everything. He may not tell you the end from the beginning, but He may tell you enough to take the very next step. And so as we look at our own lives and at church history, we can be a little forgiving of ourselves and even God if He doesn't tell us every last thing that is true that we possibly could know. But we can feel deeply grateful that he tells us things that do matter for us right now. And if we live those things, if we believe him and act on those things, we can see progress in our lives. God works with us wherever we're at. He knows you. He wants to be in relationship with you. And therefore, he reveals himself to you as you need. And that is the promise, and that is the blessing that we see in Abraham chapter 3, verses 1 through 11.